Well, greetings, cinema fans. Now, as most of you know, I occasionally like to indulge on not just reviewing new releases, but old releases. Sometimes fairly old releases, like over 3 decades old releases. Which brings us to today's podcast of a movie I picked up recently after seeing the ridiculousness of its cover at the local FYE, that movie being The Ultimate Warrior. No, not that Ultimate Warrior. This Ultimate Warrior. The 1975 The Ultimate Warrior. Or as the subtitle says on it, The Ultimate Warrior, a film of the future. A post-apocalyptic movie that is actually interesting in that it's pre-Mad Max. So it doesn't have, let's say, some of the genre developments that gave it. Now, the film stars Brynner, who is one of the more interesting mystery men of Hollywood, who basically made a career out of nobody knowing his background. That wasn't until he was died, and it was revealed he actually had still a bit of an interesting background. That and the fact that he had his head shaved, which, believe it or not, before the days of Vin Diesel and other such heroes and action stars, having a shaved head was considered odd and mysterious, which goes into Brynner's whole persona. They also, starring opposite Brynner, is, of course, the famous, well-known character actor Max von Sydow, who you probably know from Conan the Barbarian. If you've been playing Skyrim recently, you've been hearing his voice often a lot. And God, I can't even name how many movies the guy's in. Basically, pick something from the sci-fi or fantasy genre, and he's probably poked his head in there at one point. We also have Jonah Miles and Will Smith. No, not that Will Smith. Will Smith, as in the character, or as the actor better known as William Smith, who you've probably seen in such films as Conan the Barbarian, only this time playing Conan's father, and of course Red Dawn, where he played the Soviet Special Ops Commander. He was kind of one of those great 80s villains because he was this, well, built as hell. Now, the film also has a rather interesting director with some rather major cred to his title or filmography. That, of course, being Robert Clouse. Yes, the Robert Clouse behind Enter the Dragon and The Game of Death. So a guy that we can at least say can film a fight scene. He also, though, later in his life made Gymkata, China O'Brien, and China O'Brien 2, as well as the master of MST3K fame. So he's a bit mixed. Oh, did I mention he also did Black Belt Jones? But needless, this was him doing only a year after doing 2 years after doing Enter the Dragon, so he was still a bit on his martial arts kick, as we say. And in many ways, this film might have actually, speaking of martial arts and post-apocalypse, you could perhaps connect this movie with inspiring something along the lines of the famous anime Fist of the North Star. However, let's not get the Enter the Dragon and, of course, the Robert Clouse associations to confuse this with a martial arts film. This is clearly a post-apocalyptic film. Now, as for the setting, this is an interesting flaw that this movie has, in that, in a lot of ways, this is one of those films where the cause of the apocalypse really does need to be explained more, but isn't. Now, officially given, there was a plague that basically came about and wiped out most of vegetation on the planet. At least as best as the 1980s could show, or 1970s could show us. Now, why I say that's important is some apocalyptic films really don't need an explanation. Mad Max doesn't need to explain how it's in the post-apocalypse. Doesn't play a key part. Max is not solving the problem that caused the apocalypse. Same thing into some degrees. The Road. It's still somewhat of a similar explanation, but the point of the story is not to really explain. However, in this one, they leave so little, but the key thing and the key conflict in this story is that they need to deliver the seeds, because they create a group of hybrid seeds that can now grow and are resistant to the plague. And the ideal is they need to get to a safe place where they can plant the seeds and they'll grow. So you really do have to explain a little bit more thoroughly. For most of the film, for a good portion of the film, not most of it, there's never explained what the problem with the apocalypse is, how this all came about. And they only literally mention, they go, and then the plagues came. Only implying that that's what caused the apocalypse to happen. So they really needed to explain that a little bit, establish to the audience that was what the problem was. Now, I digress a little bit on that, but the point still stands. Now, the basic synopsis of this film is we have Max von Sydow has set up a group of survivors in New York City, and his group is, well, they have one particular scientist / gardener who has these hybrid seeds, and they're kind of surviving, but they're barely surviving. Things made all the more worse by a rival group of survivors who set up camp elsewhere in the city, led by Carrot, Will Smith's character. I'm sure he would have chosen the name Pepper or perhaps even Banana, but I guess somebody else took them. Anyway, it all takes place in, you guessed it, 2012. Don't you guys remember the vegetation plague that wiped us out like 2 months ago? Or maybe it's due next month. I always forget. You gotta love it when you see one of these films and it's all post-apocalyptic, and when they give the date, it's either now or 5 years. It's like Street Fighter 2012. What was with the 2012 date? This is way before the Mayan stuff became popular. But we digress once again. Anyway, Sydow's group is determined to find a fighter who they've been noticing has been hanging out, sitting in front of some old library with his shirt off, flexing his muscles for 2 days straight. So they go out and offer him a job. I so wish job interviews went like this nowadays. Not that it would help me much, it would just be weird. And pretty much would probably be the same. Just as embarrassing most times. I digress. Anyway, that of course is played by Brynner. He joins up with this group of guys, and it's revealed that Sydow didn't really take him to be the new fighter for the group, but he was looking for a person to take their seeds to somewhere they can grow. After all, they only have a rooftop garden in their compound, and they can only grow so much. If they're really to repopulate the world, or start some sort of small community, they need to expand. And by expand, he means send 3 people out. Luckily, Brynner happens to be on his way to South Carolina, where he has relatives off the coast. So Sydow is going to have both the gardener, scientist person, and his daughter have him lead them to this island. Unfortunately, Carrot has, and every time I say the name, I can't believe his name's Carrot. Carrot's group basically continues to start picking off the leaders, and Sydow, basically as the film goes on, without giving too much of the plot away, slowly starts to realize he's in a more and more desperate situation, and that it's only a matter of time before it's fully realized that his group is weak. We also get to see some interesting character moments of people within the group really breaking down. And it's an interesting thing to see because we don't see this done in this manner as much in a lot of post-apocalyptic movies. You kind of either see the person that has survived and has adapted to this world, or kind of gets killed off almost immediately. They've kind of died off already. You kind of don't see the people that were surviving, but they finally just reached their point and they just can't take it anymore. This is probably best emphasized by this we have two moments in this film that are very much like that. One is when it's revealed that there is this expedition that is going, and the group basically goes, spoiler warnings, so angry and irrational that they decide to kill the Baron, Max von Sydow's character. And only immediately after they kill him, they realize, what did we do? This is the guy that's led us. And it kind of really shows that instant kind of irrationality that's seeping into this community and chewing it apart, where it's not, they don't go from one extreme to the other. Like, they don't just stick with it. It shows that it's in transition, because they immediately stop. Like, after they beat the hell out of him, they go, oh crap, what did we do? Like, they have that rationality in them where they just don't go completely apeshit. I mean, they do, but they go back, and the characters kind of constantly do that. They do that with you see that to some degree with a character, I forget their names, but we have a couple that have a baby, and the mother of the baby becomes so desperate to find milk that she runs with an irrational, and this is what I really like about this film, this actually particular scene, is the mother is determined that this bakery, they've never really thoroughly checked it out, and that there's got to be evaporated milk there. And so she goes out of the compound by herself, where there's not only carrots game, but people, what they call the street people, basically the crazies from Escape from New York. Which, by the way, well, I'll hold off on that. So they go there. The husband realizes that that's where she went. He runs out to go save her. And, well, not only do they find out that carrots grew, that there is no milk in this facility, but Carrot's group swings by and spots them. And if this was one of Brad Jones's reviews, there would have been a rape scene in this one part, but they avert that. This was mainstream for the 70s enough where they didn't go that far, but you kind of see that probably at some point they actually had written that in the script, and they were like, we need to get funding from the studios, don't we? Well, there goes that scene. They just kill her by putting their hands on her face, and that somehow causes blood to spew. Whatever. And then, of course, they use the baby as bait to lure the rest of to try to lure out the survivors to pick them off. Only they send in Carson, Brynner's character, who basically kicks their ass. Which is kind of one of the problems with this film. They state outright that Carrot's group, he can call about 20 to 30 guys to launch an attack, and that's considered a big number. Except Carson kills like a dozen of his men. Or at least like 10 before they get to the final like escape showdown. So he's already knocked out a really significant number of Carrot's group, probably to where he no longer has the numbers to really overrun the Baron's compound, which is kind of if you really think about it, you get the idea is, okay, maybe at the start of the film things were in Carrot's favor. I mean, but near the end, you're like, Carrot should not be this. He should be really licking his wounds and trying to recover from this thing. Because Carson has really wrecked his shit. But, alas, I guess they couldn't make it that. They couldn't give them that much hope that they would just win because they could beat up the other gang. I don't know. But alas, they do that. And this is what I liked about that scene. Well, not this Carson trying to go save the baby, which, by the way, he fails. When he gets to the baby, they've killed it already. That's pretty damn brutal. If this was a modern movie, the mother would have been found right. They would have, this is one of the things I kind of hate, is they kind of give this irrationality some people have about their kids. That, the mother is always right. No. In fact, oftentimes parents are very wrong in their decisions with their children, and they weren't afraid to say that back then, to kind of remind, hey, parenting, it's a responsibility. That means you got to make the right choices, because guess what, you can be wrong. And in this case, the mother is completely wrong. There it turned out that the storage room that she tried to desperately get into, once she got in, it was just completely empty. The box was filled with nothing but old checks. When she found this one box that looked like it contained evaporated milk, turns out it was where the old owner used to store all his paychecks, or whatever it was, ordering forms or something. she was completely wrong. She's led into the trap. Or she's not led into the trap, but not only she was completely wrong, it cost her life, her husband's life, and her child's life. And they didn't even give the satisfaction. Maybe in a modern movie, they had to take the plot. They would point out that she was right, and at least in the end, yes, there is milk. Then they would turn around, and then there would be gangs. No, they're brutal enough in this film, dark enough to go, no. She just completely lost it. And that's what I kind of like about this film. It does go there, as they would say. I don't want to talk too much about the end, but after they escape, they are after the expedition leaves, minus one member who is killed. I'll save that as a surprise, although I guarantee you can guess it. Brynner kind of starts picking off the Carrot's group for whatever reasons. Like they the Baron. Well, okay, I'm going to give it away now, but the Baron's daughter and the fighter have gone into the sewers. Well, let's chase them. That's their intention. Let's chase these two guys who go and run off into the sewers, and not, I don't know, attack. Considering the guy who you're fairly certain is their biggest defense is apparently leaving. Why chase the guy down? Why not attack the main compound? I mean, at this point, they only do rally about like 5 or 6 guys to go into the sewers, and basically Brynner starts picking them off until you get to, of course, the climactic fight between Carrot and Carson. God, that sounded really cheesy. Carrot versus Carson. What can I say? The 70s did not have a good idea of how to name their people. Well, Carson's a good name. Carson's actually a kick-ass name. If I make another Fallout character, it's going to be a pugilistic Carson. This is going to go around and punch people, because it's pretty much what everybody uses in this apocalypse. They basically just find a stick or a pipe, and that's the weapons they use. Except for Carson, who's the only person that thought of using a knife. And not even a huge knife. It's not even like a Rambo fuck-off knife. It's a rather small, regular knife. And that's how basically Carson normally wins. He just stabs whoever's attacking him. The fighting is not that great, despite Coulson's repertoire of having some of the best martial arts film, well, the best martial arts film of all time, in my opinion. That was mainly due to the fight choreography of Bruce Lee, or other experts. This wasn't a martial arts film, and this was long before Hollywood had fight choreographers to do this stuff. Hell, even in Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee was not even... They didn't even have the term fight choreographer thought of yet. They hadn't invented that term. That's how new it was. So they had to say, fight scenes staged by Bruce Lee. So obviously, if for that film they didn't have it, or they didn't even have the terminology set yet, you can imagine they really didn't have a guy on set that really knew how to work through these fights. So they're not, for a modern audience, that's going to look rather bland. If you can appreciate the older film styles and older filmmaking, you'll get past that. The other interesting aspect of this is something I said earlier about this film, and that is the fact that this is a pre-Mad Max post-apocalyptic film. Mad Max so defined the post-apocalyptic genre and how raiders look and how people will be set up. Especially visually, that it's interesting to see this film, because you see a lot of things that you would later see in the Mad Max series. However, especially Road Warrior, so you see the compounds that are kind of made from kind of like taking this random stuff like barrels and kind of haphazardly attaching them to make gates and stuff. You kind of see that part of the post-apocalypse. They, of course, are filming in New York, or at least I think it's New York. And they have that old New York look, way before New York really cleaned up and kind of rebuilt itself. That old industrial New York look that pretty much looked post-apocalyptic. you really don't see that type of architecture now because it aged very poorly and it looks rather that type of industrial architecture that was made more for housing blue collar factory workers or their associated blue collar job facilities where they would work. It doesn't age very well at all and looks run down very quickly, even if it's still technically fine. So it's hard to find that stuff because a lot of times the developer comes in, they'll rip down that building real quick because it can make the property value much better if you put in a new building. I've really only seen this in like Trenton, and maybe if you're in an old industrial center, you might see some of this. But in most cities that are still, not Detroit, still expanding, constantly rebuilding, you don't see this New York anymore. It's gone. And you can see why in this film, because it does look very Escape from New York-y, which is the other film I would say probably gave this film some inspiration, or this film inspired. Just with kind of the crazies, how they come out at night. There's the idea of these street people, although the dress is not as apocalyptic. Like you can see people are wearing kind of run-down older clothes, but that's just it. They're just older clothes that are kind of run down. They're not completely tattered. You can see people try to keep them clean as much as they can. They're obviously not super fancy, but hey. They work. They're believable. At least, not if it was the actual 2012, but they're believable for 70s version of 2012. What else shall I say? I don't think there's much more. Well, there is much more I could talk about this film, but it's not that kind of. This isn't that type of review. This is one of those movies I do wish I might come back at a later time when I have more of a setup, i.e. I have the digital camera to do kind of a more thorough review. I have the time and the resources to really pull scenes from this, the time to script out. I mean, I technically have the time. It's the resources. This is certainly on the short list of movies that I actually want to kind of do a more kind of review in the same vein as Spoonie, the nostalgia critic, Brad Jones is a cinema snob, such. Maybe not as comedic, although certainly this film there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of jokes to be made with this, just with the name and of course the wrestler. But it's certainly one I think deserves it. If you've never seen the film and you're a post-apocalypse movie fan, give it a check. It's an interesting film. It's a decent film, and it comes on a 2-disc DVD, or not a 2-disc, but a 2-movie DVD set, a double feature, a Warner Home Video sci-fi double feature, including Battle Beneath the Earth, which is actually the reason I picked this movie up, because that looked ridiculous enough that I had to pick it up. And ironically, also, is apparently from what I read, is another film where they have Asians played by white people. And if you don't get that reference, it's that Yul Brynner, despite being of, I think it was either Swiss or Russian descent, he was most famous for playing the King of Siam in The King and I. But Battle Beneath the Earth I have not caught yet, or have not watched yet, so keep a lookout for that one. I have to at some point watch that. Of course, I also have to watch Red Dawn, which I have seen multiple times. I did want picking that up as well, but that's not Red Dawn at this point is a classic. But it does have William Smith in it, which I found ironic. As for other site news, I think I've already given updates what I plan to do this week. The Legend of Korra review, if you're watching this new, and it's might be a little bit delayed because I have to do a CPR class on Saturday, so it's going to interfere with catching that because it's like an all-day thing, so that might get delayed. But I still plan on checking out The Raven, so stay tuned for that. If I get an opportunity to watch Battle Beneath the Earth, you can expect me to do a review of that at some point, if it's ridiculous enough and I can recommend it. And of course, check this movie out. If you like 70s movies, if you like post-apocalyptic movies, this is worth it checking out. It's pretty cheap. I picked it up for like $5, and you get another movie, so you really paid $2.50 for the film. Give it a check. My recommendation.